Thanks everyone for joining us. I'm Jordan Rutter, Director of Communications for American Bird Conservancy, and your host today. This webinar is being recorded and will be shared with you afterward. We'll be putting links in the chat, but in case you missed them, please know that we'll be sending an email to everyone who registered, and it'll contain all those links referenced today, as well as a link to the recording. Automated captions are available for this webinar, and you can turn them on by clicking on the CC icon located on your screen. Please submit any questions you have during the presentations using the Q&A box so we can keep track of those. Birds inspire and delight us. They fill us with wonder and joy, and they do so much from pollination to pest control. But birds are in trouble. They're disappearing fast. Thanks to generous support from people like you, ABC works with diverse partners throughout the Western Hemisphere to prevent imminent bird extinctions, improve millions of acres of habitat with bird-friendly management practices, and advocate for and create innovative solutions to urgent threats that put birds at risk. And together, we're achieving results. Over the past 30 years, ABC has conserved 3,000 bird species and 10 million acres of habitat for birds across the Americas. But the challenges facing birds are more urgent than ever. That's why American Bird Conservancy is taking bold action for birds, and we need your help to do it. I know you're here today because you care about birds. Me too. They bring so much to our lives. By spending time noticing and appreciating the wonder of birds, we often find hope. And at ABC, that hope drives action and yields results, the kind you'll learn about today when it comes to restoring populations of the Northern Bobwhite. Members make ABC's results possible, which is why I'm so excited to extend a special offer to you all today. If you join American Bird Conservancy with a gift of $35 or more, we will send you a copy of the award-winning hardcover coffee table book, Bringing Back the Birds. It features 200 stunning photos of birds from across the Americas, including the Northern Bobwhite. It has engaging essays from bird conservation experts, including a foreword by Jonathan Franzen and an original poem by Margaret Atwood. ABC members also receive 3 issues of our beautiful and recently redesigned magazine, Bird Conservation. Discounts including 30% off the Princeton Nature book catalog and 15% off Birds and Beans coffee, invitations to members-only events and webinars, and so much more. Members make it possible for ABC to conserve bird habitat, as well as help prevent extinctions, reverse population declines, reduce threats for birds, and build an inclusive and equitable future for bird conservation. Together, we can do even more to conserve wild birds like the Northern Bobwhite and the habitats they need to thrive. Will you join ABC now to claim your book and make a difference for wild birds across the Americas? Please visit abcbirds.org/give or scan the code on the screen with your phone now. I know this is the first ABC webinar for so many of you. Welcome. We're so glad you're here. Thank you for caring about birds and joining us. And special thanks to all the current ABC members and supporters in the audience today. You are making a difference for birds across the Americas every single day. But don't miss out. This book is amazing. Back to the regular webinar though. So that call that you heard at the beginning is unmistakable, isn't it? Just like the bird it belongs to, talk about a charmer. I've been birding since I was a kid, and I can count the number of times that I've observed a verified wild Northern Bobwhite. And when it comes to my confirmed and logged entries in eBird, I can actually count them. 6, just 6. Now, a large part of that is due to location. I am located in Maryland, which has experienced a more significant and noticeable drop in Northern Bobwhite population than in other places within the range. But as we learned from all of you, as you shared your own fascination, love, and observations of this bird, and its call when signing up for this webinar, I'm not alone. Many of you recall a time when bobwhite were a much more frequent occurrence in the shrubby fields and habitats that they need to thrive. But today, that iconic whistling call often brings more feelings of nostalgia than a story of a recent observation. And the data backs me up. Between a study period of 1996 to 2014, the North American Breeding Bird Survey reported that populations of Northern Bobwhite experienced an overall decline of 85%. Partners in Flight considers the northern bobwhite as a common bird in steep decline, which both feels like an oxymoron and a call for bold action from ABC. How can we make sure that the word common remains attached to this bird, though? The good news is that the northern bobwhite is one of the most extensively studied birds in the world. It falls shy just short of the domesticated chicken and turkey. And that fact, along with the conservation efforts underway by American Bird Conservancy and our partners, means that we have both the science and the expertise to move from wonder to action on behalf of this delightful but declining bird. And with your support, we're working to bring bobwhite back and get those results. So let's learn how. I'm so excited for for me to introduce you to today's experts. First up, we'll have Robert Perez. He's coordinator of the Oaks and Prairies joint venture. A South Texas native, Robert retired from Texas Parks and Wildlife in 2021 after serving in various roles, mostly related to upland game birds. With nearly 30 years of experience as a wildlife professional, he has led strategic planning efforts and has contributed to the design and implementation of numerous national, regional, and state initiatives and plans. Robert holds a bachelor's and master's degree in biology from Texas State University, where his master's work focused on the survival of wild and pen-raised northern bobwhite. Cole Fagen is Oaks and Prairies joint venture coordinating biologist. He received a master's degree from Oklahoma State University in natural resource ecology and management and a bachelor's in natural resource management from Angelo State University. He's very passionate about land stewardship and works with private landowners to put habitat conservation on the ground. Experience includes working with prescribed burn associations all over the state of Oklahoma and working for the Natural Resources Cooperation Extension at Oklahoma State University. Last but not least, we have Steve Riley, who's ABC's Chief Conservation Officer. He works to improve conditions for birds by providing practical interpretation of ecological complexities to inform policy and management decisions. Steve received a bachelor's in wildlife and fisheries science and a master's in plant ecology from South Dakota State University and has considerable experience working with farm bill policy and managing private land programs. He's a certified wildlife biologist and a fellow of the National Conservation Leadership Institute. Steve formerly worked for the Northern Great Plains and Oaks and Prairies joint ventures, Pheasants Forever, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, among many others. Again, we're going to have Robert start us with some natural history about this incredible bird. So Robert, welcome.
Good afternoon.
Do you have a favorite bobwhite fact, Robert, as you get set up?
My favorite bobwhite fact would be that hens in the spring can double clutch. They can leave one of their nests with a male, she's called a gypsy hen, and go to another male and have a second clutch and double her production over one summer. It's a little known fact.
That's incredible, and I can't wait for you to share your great presentation. Take it away.
Thank you. So here's the distribution of northern bobwhite in North America. It's far less today, as Jordan indicated. It shrunk over the past several decades. Quail, northern bobwhite have also been introduced all over the world, mostly unsuccessfully. A very popular bird, very charismatic, but it's been here a very long time. And early indigenous peoples of North America certainly impact their environment around them to a certain degree, but really in no way impact this bird. It ebbs and flows in its distribution. Those cultures pretty much lived in harmony with nature. But most importantly, the Great Plains cultures really understood the importance of fire, and were probably the first wildlife managers using fire to influence habitat, especially where northern bobwhite occurred. Once Europeans arrived on the scene, their impact on the habitat for bobwhite has been referred to as accidental management. And that's because the farming techniques early on were primitive. The row crop agriculture, the food patches, timber harvest was just slash and burn, a culture of woods burnings. And at that time, there was a whole lot of waste. There were woody fence rows. There was seed left over on the ground. There weren't any herbicides. And at that time, there were great population eruptions in Illinois and the Southeast. And many states have records in the 40s, 50s, and 60s where there were just these gigantic population explosions of wild northern bobwhite that were just really doing well in this landscape across the nation. So much so, I mean, referenced as King Bob, Gentleman Bob, the sport of kings, very culturally significant across a wide part of our country, historically highly prized game species, very economically important to many of those cultures across the Southeast historically. Like I said, a lot of those populations have vastly shrunk. There was one study done in Texas among Texas quail hunters, and it came to the conclusion that quail that were harvested in Texas were about $300 per ounce is what it came to when they calculated all the expenditures in one season. So definitely very important for many reasons. But unfortunately, at one part of another of their range, they've been declining for at least the past 100 years. And if you talk to somebody about anybody else that's affected by those changes in the environment, they refer to bobwhite as being one of those umbrella species, which means it represents a habitat or multiple habitats that many other birds share. In this instance, the Grassland Bird Guild, about 20 some odd species of grassland birds have also experienced steep declines over the same time period that Northern Bobwhite have declined. So here's just some visuals taken from the BBS that Jordan referenced. So if you go decade by decade, kind of through time, the darker red indicates denser populations. As you go through the decades, it gets less and less dark red and more pink. And some good data that's been collected since 1966, and it's very clearly makes the case that populations have been greatly reduced. And so what happened? The perception is, it's predators or it's feral hogs or it's chupacabras or it's something. Definitely nothing I did or my neighbor did or anything we did. And the reality is that the fundamental cause is just an overwhelming loss of habitat. We lost that habitat for a variety of reasons, and those are all challenges that this bird has had to face. One of the big ones is just the removal of fire. So the lack of fire in these many systems across North America that depend on it to stay open and to keep woody species out. Also the modernization of agriculture. So as agriculture became more efficient, clean farming, clean fence rows, no weeds, no insects, the use of herbicides, pesticides, all that removed habitat for bobwhite quail. Improper grazing, fences went up and cows were concentrated, and the species makeup of plants changed through time. We introduced a lot of different species of grass for cattle over the decades, and none of which bobwhite quail evolved with, and maybe can't use many of them to meet their habitat needs. And of course, there's more and more of us. And as the countryside gets chopped up into smaller and smaller pieces, species like quail kind of need larger areas to persist. And so a little about their life history. They're ground dwelling. They're not migratory. They're not capable of long distance flight, just short burst, 50, 60, 80 yards is a long way for a quail to fly. There's a rooster, he's the male, and a hen, the female, and they are sexually dimorphic. You can see there in the picture. The male is on the right with the white streaks. And they form pairs in the spring like many other birds, and they build a nest on the ground. The ground nesting birds are gallinaceous type birds, so they are on the ground. And the hen lays 1 to 3 clutches per year. The first one may be depredated, and then she'll try a second time, and then a third if there's enough time across the season. There's about 12, 14 eggs in each nest, and they incubate for about 23 days. In the fall, they do a shuffle. They break out of those familial groups, and they kind of reform into these coveys, like miniature flocks, but they're called coveys. These groups of 10 to 20 units, like a military unit. They've got to get through the hard winter. They hold a tight formation. They communicate with various calls. They have a high annual turnover. So once that season begins, everything wants, not only do we love quail, but everything out there around them wants to eat a quail. So they're very prized by all predators out there as a food source. And so during year round, they feed twice a day and they loaf or hang around in the middle of the day. The chicks and the laying hens require more protein, which comes in the form of insects. Now I've got a picture here of a male bobwhite with chicks. They share duties of raising the chicks, and they're drinking water. And the first bullet says, "Require no free water." And that's because water isn't all over their range, and they actually don't have to drink water. They will if it's there, but they get all the moisture that they need for their bodily requirements for the foods that they eat. They occupy not one singular habitat, but they can occur in grassland, savanna, shrubland. They've got this range of tolerance. So places that are barely open to places that are maybe 30, 40% woody canopy. So they've got this concept of slack where they can occur in a whole different, several different looking type of areas. But if you're a quail biologist, you're looking at it, it kind of all looks the same because it meets the needs of the cover types that they need. So that's another reason why they call them an umbrella species. So in review, here's a year in the life of a quail. Hard way to make a living, hard life for a quail. But in the spring is probably the lowest populations of the year, where they're forming their pair bonds and laying nests, and then very rapidly, especially when conditions are good with good habitat, good weather, rainfall, those conditions are good, grasses are there, and they can quickly increase their numbers just 10, 20, 30 fold, and then meet their maximum population about the middle of the summer. And from there, it's kind of all downhill where chicks are meet mortality, then fall comes, and then the winter comes, and the pressures of those changes in the environment take their toll until the following spring. So annual turnover may be 100% of the population. At the end of the year, to following spring, there might be 20 to 30% left on the landscape. Those cover types I mentioned are nesting and brooding, where they take the brood of foraging, loafing, escape, roosting. And the next speaker, Cole Fagen, will talk a little bit more specifically about those needs. But that's it. In a nutshell, we thank you all. Thank you support. And with that, I'll hand it back over to Jordan.
Thanks so much, Robert. Cole, are you still with us? How's your Wi-Fi?
I'm good.
Awesome. Let's get you started then.
So, we're going to touch on the quail habitat threats and some conservation work that ABC is promoting. Just a little bit about me so everyone knows where my biases come from. Like Jordan said, I'm worked for the Oaks and Prairies joint venture in ABC since 2021 of June. I am based and live in Ada, Oklahoma, kind of south central Oklahoma. And I went to Angelo State and Oklahoma State. And there's a picture of me and one of my best mentors, Kenji, on a prescribed fire. And just a disclaimer, I'm not a quail biologist, not formally educated in quail, but I've hung out with so many, I could probably play one on TV. Bobwhite habitat. So bobwhites, in my opinion, in my experience, they're pretty picky. They need multiple habitat types throughout their entire life and throughout the year. And diversity in that habitat is critical to to them thriving. They're often called a grassland bird. However, this is kind of a misnomer, not really correct. Bobwhites are shrubland obligate birds. They need shrubs in close proximity to each other, and we'll get into that here in just a minute. There's a picture of a quail project in western Oklahoma with some good grasses, some nesting cover, and escape cover all mixed together and close. So bobwhite habitat, Fred Guthrie said in a book that habitat management is 9/10 of bobwhite management. Bobwhites need large areas of quality habitat to persist year after year. There was a study at OSU that found in southeast Oklahoma, quail need about 700 acres of core habitat to persist year after year. So that's having coveys of quail all the time. And good habitat really acts like a buffer for crazy weather events, hard freezes, hot summers, and predation. So you have to think of quail habitat as rooms in a house. The kitchen and pantry has to be pretty close to the living room, and it all has to be close to the bedroom. You can't have the kitchen 200 yards out the back door. So some brooding habitat. Brooding habitat is where chicks are raised. The brood habitat typically consists of bare ground, some early successional plants, a lot of weeds, and some overhead cover. Quail chicks are really about the size of a golf ball when they're hatched, and they need a way to get around in a lot of seed producing forbs, otherwise weeds, like we like to call them. And insects, that green fresh growth attracts the insects so that way they can get the protein requirements that they need. And nesting habitat looks a little bit different. They need large bunch grasses and bare ground in between those. So they need 2-year-old plus grass plants to be able to have a good nest in. And a lot of these blue stems, they actually will die out in the very middle of the plant, and it just creates a perfect little spot for them to make a nest and to hatch their eggs. So grazing is sometimes talked about bad for wildlife habitat, but grazing when it's at the correct stocking rate, when you're grazing correctly, is really good for quail. It's been said that a quail's best friend is a rancher with bird dogs, someone who likes to hunt quail, and they typically run their property to manage for quail. Loafing and escape cover. They need some woody shrubs, like I said earlier, typically under 6 feet in height. Some species that they like are plum, sumac, and blackberry. Typically, all of our native shrub species are good quail houses. They are typically, Volkswagen-sized brush islands in mixed grass, and sometimes they need some periodic management. A lot of these brushy islands can turn unmanaged into little forests, and the plant community will change, and then they no longer become useful for quail. They use these for thermal protection in the winter and in the summer, and they also use it to hide from predators. A lot of times in some parts of the world, an old tractor out in the field can be used as a quail house or escape cover. I love to show these OSU infographics. Oklahoma State does a great job at taking data and scientific papers, taking the information out of them, and making them really digestible to everyday people. And this one shows that you need to leave a bunch for bobwhite. When you graze really heavily and you don't leave grass from the year before, you have very sparse tall bunch grasses, or if you are doing annual burning, there's no tall bunch grasses left year after year. And those blue stem species like broom sedge and little blue stem are ideal for nesting for bobwhite quail. And then the shrubs and the trees. So OSU did some studies or looked at some studies that showed a higher chance of survival when they're closer to those shrub species that we talked about. And then they have a less of a chance of survival when they're closer to trees. So large trees in heavily wooded areas, they have a lower chance of survival when that is the dominant plants on the landscape. Quail are often called the firebird, and this is what really makes me like quail so much. In the 1920s, American naturalist Herbert Stoddard nicknamed the bobwhite the firebird. He did a lot of studies in northern Florida and Georgia, and he called them that because he saw their ecological dependence on fire and the habitat that it creates, especially in the eastern United States, where they get more rainfall and vegetation grows faster. Fire and fire frequency creates the diverse habitat that's critical to quail survival. It stimulates the native plants and keeps it in the structure that quail need to survive. Historically, fire was used by Native Americans all over the globe, and I mean all over the United States and all over the globe. For 100,000 plus years, people have manipulated their environment wherever they were at, living in harmony with nature, like Robert said. And anthropogenic fire shaped the ecosystems of North America and most of the earth. There's over 70 documented reasons for fire in Native American culture. They used it for hunting, they used it for war, for foraging, and even fire protections around their own communities. The relationship between fire and bison grazing created the diverse ecosystems and was the most influential impacts to the places in North America. Once European settlement occurred, they almost immediately put an end to the fire culture in most of North America, kind of leaving us with what we see today. So the status of bobwhite habitat is it's in peril. So our grassland and shrublands are disappearing faster than any other ecosystem globally. Our woody tree cover is going up super rapidly, which decreases diversity and increases predation. Our early successional habitat, those weedy fields that are critical for brood rearing, are on the decline. They're one of the most limiting factors across most of the range. And that removal of fire, the introduced and invasive species, and human development all play a role in this habitat loss. There's a lot of myths about quail, so we're going to try and bust them. We hear that it's the predators. We hear that it's the bobcats, roadrunners, hawks, feral pigs, egrets, snakes, turkeys, skunks, Bigfoot, and black panthers, and several others I've heard. The truth is that it really is all of them. Our habitat degradation and habitat loss puts quail in closer proximity to predator habitats. When nesting and brooding habitat are really limited, predators don't have as much area to search for quail. If there was hundreds of acres of good habitat, a bobcat or a skunk or a raccoon would have to walk a lot further to find quail nest and to find birds to prey upon. Some more myths is that nothing has changed. I hear this all the time, and many people claim that nothing's changed, but it is flat out just not true. This infographic on the right here shows how many millions of acres of grassland losses have occurred in the Great Plains. In the northern region of the Great Plains, a lot of it's lost to cropland, gets plowed up, and in the southern part of the range, a lot of it's been lost to woody plant encroachment and development. Overcrowded forests in the eastern United States is a big part to play in quail habitat loss. and Bermuda and fescue pastures. These introduced species that really have nothing for quail. They don't provide any food or cover, and these monocultures really make it like a desert for quail in a lot of pastures. This picture on the bottom shows very quickly encroached pasture in Oklahoma that in 10 years will be completely unusable by quail from all these little cedar trees popping up. Just a cool example I love to show of how stuff has changed is this photo point of Hairpin Corner in Davis, Oklahoma from the 1930s after the highway was built. You can see in the background and in the foreground open rolling hills, scattered brush, and it really there's a lot of stories of people hunting quail on horseback and seeing lots of birds in this area. And you switch over here to 2024, we flew it with a drone and recreated this picture. You can see almost all those open spaces have been filled in by cedar trees, and all the habitat and ecosystem services has just totally disappeared. There's a lot of acres in the eastern United States that looks way too similar to this. This is an overgrown forest in Oklahoma, and there are too many acres that look just like this. They would need to pack a lunch prescribed fire has been removed from the landscape for the last 200 plus years, and this map on the right shows that most of the United States is a fire dependent ecosystem. So the Oaks and Prairies joint venture has the Grassland Restoration Incentive Program, which is helping to get fire back on the landscape. We're incentivizing landowners to implement practices to restore grassland ecosystems. This involves prescribed fire, some brush management, planting native grasses, and then grazing management as well. Here's a couple of pictures of some grip projects. This was one where in western or central Oklahoma, we did a grip project with a gentleman and helped him do a prescribed burn on his pasture, and then clearing some cedar trees, opening the canopy, getting native grasses to reestablish. And the ultimate habitat tool for bobwhite quail would be patch burn grazing. So we said that the grazing and fire and that interaction created those diverse ecosystems. Patch burn grazing is a lot like rotational grazing, but without any of the fence and infrastructure. The patches in your pasture are burned in a rotation, and concentrating the grazing to the most recently burned area. If you've ever seen a wildfire or a burn somewhere where there's cattle, they will camp out on the most recently burned area until something else is burned or it grows up. So this allows rest in your unburned areas, which increases diversity in plant structure and composition. But this only works if your pasture is stocked correctly, if you're already grazing at a sustainable rate. So this patch burn grazing puts all those rooms in the house close to each other. You have your cover, your seed production, and your nesting cover all close together in close proximity. Here's a couple of examples from people that I've worked with. Just a text I got one morning and said, "Sorry to bother you, but I had a covey of quail in my front yard a few minutes ago. No big deal, except there were 24 of them. I haven't seen a covey of wild birds like that in 20 years. They were not babies. I guess the burning is working. Have a good day." And then I have a screenshot from a video of after we did a prescribed burn, the gentleman going through his pasture the next day, seeing quail already using the burned area. The prescribed fire will uncover a lot of seeds and insects that are good quail food. So they love to go in there and check out their burned habitat after a burn. And in conclusion, we're really lucky that birds can't work lighters. If quail and turkey could work a lighter, there would be fires going on across the United States all of the time. And it just shows that when they respond to these burns and you see them in your burned units, right after or years after, that that that's what that habitat's supposed to look like and use fire to do that. So with that, thank you guys, and I'll hand it back to Jordan.
That was great, Cole. Gosh, those chicks are so hard to beat. We'll see you again shortly, though, Cole. Welcome, Steve.
Hi there. Let me share the proper screen. All right. Does that look good, Jordan?
Yep,
Thank
take
you.
it away.
All right. So we've heard Robert and Cole talk to us about what quail need, where they are, what harms them, what helps them. And I'll kind of run through a few of those things again, just in review. But I'm going to talk a little bit about how folks on the call can help. And we'll talk more about that later on. So what is it about bobwhites? Bobwhites are a well-known, much-loved species. So they draw our attention. They're not the only thing that lives in these spaces, but they may be the thing that we recognize the most. Robert called the bobwhite a umbrella species, and when we think of an umbrella, it's all of the other species kind of fall underneath the needs of that, or many of the other species under the needs of that umbrella species. So those things that Cole talked about, being, those parts of the house all being close together, that helps a lot of other species. And if we expand that out, like Cole said, to 700 or 7,000 acres of good habitat, the replication of those kinds of habitats in close proximity benefit a whole bunch of other things that people don't know as much about. I'm using the term anchor, like Robert used umbrella, because I think that it also applies for this, but it also fits a nice kind of a continuing analogy of bobwhites, and this anchor concept tend to be, for the other species, the rising tide that lifts all boats. So we can get a lot of benefit for a lot of other wildlife species, a lot of other birds, by managing for wildlife. So from a policy standpoint, that makes it easier for us to target things that people know and people love, and that also bring in a lot of other benefits. And you've already heard that bobwhites tend to need healthier grasslands, shrublands, and savannas. They can't really do closed forest, but they can handle 30% forest cover with a good understory. And typically, when we talk about bobwhite species, these good spaces are defined by better plant diversity, structure, size, and spacing, something that we wonky scientists will call juxtaposition, which is how close are those rooms in the house that that Cole talked about to one another. I think I've got something up on the screen that I don't want on the screen, and I don't know how to get rid of it. At any rate, we'll just run right on. Bobwhite tend to be friendly for with a lot of agricultural systems, some farming practices, certainly ranching practices, as Cole mentioned, and we can work with things that are mutually beneficial for producers and bobwhites, and then all of those other species. Some of what we do when and Cole mentioned this, a lot of this habitat restoration work in order to kind of bring back more habitat is doing things to existing habitats to make them more resilient and better for bobwhite. And sometimes it requires us to go in where we've lost habitat altogether and maybe replant that. And the photograph here on the right shows a really nice mixture of a few trees and shrubs and a lot of wildflowers, which produce a lot of habitat that birds need. Particularly, bobwhites will use this for brood rearing cover, where there's a lot of protein in those plants, and there are a lot of insects. So I guess in summary for this part, there are a lot of ways that you can help, and we'll talk about some of those things going forward here. We do have, I'd be remiss if we didn't talk right up front that we have lots of other people working in this space. We have the National Bobwhite and Grassland Initiative that works throughout the grassland range. We have NRCS and their Working Lands for Wildlife program, Quail Forever, the migratory bird joint ventures have been mentioned. And we have a lot of local and regional groups that also work on bobwhite. So we have lots of friends helping. So it's important to think about bobwhite in terms of, where they exist and who owns the land that they live on. As the thing to remember, and I'll show a couple slides here, bobwhite generally live in private landscapes. So we don't have public lands we can go to and do magic on to make a lot of birds come back. We need to work on private lands, which means that we have to focus on working with private landowners and within the context of a profitable farming operation, ranching operation. This is this image, you don't have to look through all of it, but you can get a pretty good sense that there's a lot of private lands, and states like Texas, where Robert is, or Oklahoma, where coal is, you can see that it's mostly private land. So we're gonna do conservation with private landowners, and that's important when we start talking about what can we do to help. So one of the biggest things that we have in front of us that we can use is the Farm Bill. People may not know this. The Farm Bill is a big, giant bill, but it is the source of the greatest single source of conservation dollars from any one place, and not just in America, but anywhere else as well. And you can see from this slide that I got tons of acronyms here. NRCS is Natural Resources Conservation Service. ASEP is the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program. CSP is a Conservation Stewardship Program. EQIP is the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. RCPP is a Regional Conservation Partnership Program. That's just within the Natural Resources Conservation Service. And you can see that there are a lot of dollars here that go out to provide conservation on privately owned lands. We also have, through the Farm Service Agency, the Conservation Reserve Program, which has 27 million acres spread across the country, and it is about a $2 billion a year program. So you can see we have some resources here. But the big challenge is these are kind of out there to do all sorts of conservation for all sorts of things. And so it's, my job is a lot to do with trying to get as many of those dollars that are out there focused on bird conservation, bobwhite conservation. So one of the most important things that we do, and it's actually a program within NRCS, is conservation technical assistance. Cole does this every day of his life, is out working with producers to actually make changes on the landscape. When we deliver programs, Cole mentioned the Grassland Restoration Incentive Program from Oaks and Prairies Joint Venture. There are a lot of local regional programs like that that dovetail nicely with a lot of these national programs. But no matter what you do with money, you can't just throw money at the issue. What you have to do conservation is actually work with people. And it's mostly one-on-one conversations with a practitioner and a landowner, building trust, and then building a conservation plan, and then trying to deploy whatever programs make the most sense. We call this technical guidance, and it's really vital for sound conservation. And we have, again, the program is the Conservation Technical Assistance Program that not only provides funding for NRCS to put people in the field themselves, but through partner organizations like American Bird Conservancy, Quail Forever, and others. Now, private lands biologists are pretty important in that equation because we need good distribution of those people to be able to deliver the programs and to deliver wildlife management. A lot of the people who work in USDA are not wildlife biologists, they're not foresters. So we need specialists to be able to work in the area. And then this is an analysis that was done of private lands biologists around the country. And all you need to notice is that the blue bar is what we have, and the red bar is what we have assessed is the need. Now, this was done a few years ago, but it's largely the same right now. We've had some improvements, but we have a great need to have people out there to talk with the producers. And so this is a lot about improving public policies, right? We have laws. The Farm Bill is, as I mentioned, is a really important law that allows us to do conservation. Once those laws are passed, then there are rules that are developed, and we can intervene with those rules and work with the USDA to help make those rules better for bobwhite in this case, for birds. And we build programs around that legislation, and we deliver those conservation practices through the pathways that I described with conservation practitioners. All of those things have some ability for us to go in and manipulate those so that they're better for delivering conservation that are going to benefit bobwhite and other birds. And so a lot of what we do and a lot of what you can do is to help to influence change. We can develop conservation plans that give producers a win-win outcome so that they can be sustainable and profitable, but still have quail and other wildlife. We can influence the programs and the practices and the funding that goes into conservation. We can help influence what's in the Farm Bill, different aspects of how the Farm Bill works and the funding that comes to these programs. And you can continue by helping to influence rules at the local area. You can become a member of a local organization. You can be a member of ABC and help us that way. There are also local working groups for the Natural Resource Conservation Service that you might be able to become a part of and get your voice heard that way. So you can, a part of this is learning what's important with the wildlife habitat and then being able to engage it. And if you don't want to do that, you can help by helping us and helping some of our partners do the legwork on your behalf. A big part of it is just making sure that we have the resources out there to put the qualified and energetic people to work with the producers. And lastly, we do have mechanisms where you can become involved with our Bird Conservation Alliance. And we send out regular requests for people to engage members of Congress through letter writing campaigns and that sort of thing. And we can help you walk through that process. But there are a lot of ways you can help, a lot of things that need to be done. And I'm going to turn it back over to Jordan.
Thank you so much, Steve. That was wonderful. I'm going to invite Cole and Robert back to join us. You all had such wonderful information, jam-packed presentations. I can't wait for folks to get the recording of this and share it with others. But the other thing that I really hope that we can talk about is what you hope that folks will share with a friend. So Robert, it's great to see you, and I'd love to know what you would love for our audience, our really wonderful, so supportive audience, to take away from this webinar and share with a friend about bobwhite.
Oh, yeah. Well, apologies for dropping out. I'm not exactly sure what happened, so I'm not sure what slide it went into, but I appreciate everybody being here today. And bobwhite, for me, have a special place in my life and in my heart. I spent a lot of time growing up around them in South Texas, and they're just very charismatic, and all the different calls that they make, they're just have a lot of endearing qualities. It's probably one of the main reasons why I got into this profession to begin with. So I think folks that get to know bobwhite or spend any time around them at all, you just fall in love with them as well. And they do represent so many other bird species that are in decline. So efforts that we do to help a number of different species will help bobwhite as well. As Steve mentioned, when you help this particular one, you're helping so many birds, and the efforts that we do, the efforts that Cole described about the work we do on private lands are so important, because that's where the rubber hits the road. And that's where we can make a difference.
Thanks, Robert. Cole, what do you hope folks took away from your presentation and will share about bobwhites with their friends?
I really hope people took away the fact that they like fire and that fire is good for their ecosystems. I would encourage everyone to look into using fire on properties that they manage and joining a prescribed burn association. There's a bunch of prescribed burn associations across the United States, which are just cooperative groups of landowners and land managers who use fire to improve their properties, and it's a good neighbor helping neighbor community, and it's an awesome group to join, so I hope everyone looks into that.
Absolutely, Cole. Great tip. And Steve.
Yeah, I just hope everyone comes away from today with a few more ideas in their pocket about how they can engage the process, and not just for bobwhite, but for birds and for wildlife in general. I hope that that you feel more hopeful about your place in all of this and your ability to join in and make a difference.
Great point, Steve. Thank you so much, everyone, again for joining us. Thank you so much to our speakers. You all were fabulous. All registrants will receive a link to the recording, and all of the links shared in the chat will also be in that email in just a few days, hitting your inbox. Please know that the conservation efforts that you've heard about today are only possible thanks to ABC members and supporters like you who care about birds and believe in ABC's mission to conserve them. Together, we can do even more to save wild birds and their habitats that they need to thrive. Will you become an ABC member now to make a difference for wild birds across the Americas? If you do, we'll send you a copy of this incredible, absolutely beautiful, large format book, Bringing Back the Birds. It has uh, so many incredible pieces of content for you to enjoy with your friends and family. Over the next year, you'll also get 3 incredible magazines, Bird Conservation, discounts for bird enthusiasts, and so much more. You'll also help ABC reach our From Wonder to Action 1-to-1 match campaign goal of raising $2 million for bird conservation by December 31st. If you feel so compelled, you can join now at abcbirds.org/give, and you will get this book in just a few weeks. Please scan the code on your screen with your phone or check out the secure online donation form that you'll be redirected to after this webinar ends today. Our next webinar is going to be Wednesday, November 19th at 4 p.m. Eastern, and we'll explore how appreciating the wonder of birds, from the marvels of migration to the joys of appreciating backyard birds, can also drive bold conservation action to conserve them by meeting some ABC experts who transformed that inspiration into initiative. Look for an opportunity to RSVP with your webinar recording email and other ABC communication products. Thank you so much for caring about birds, and good birding.